So let's begin. I have a big heart here. Now, I have the box because someone gave me chocolates. We ate all the chocolates, but there's something in the heart that I want you to know about. The scripture says that out of the heart flow the issues of life, and out of the heart the mouth speaks. So I think we're all familiar with this concept. But I got to thinking one day, what are the issues that come out of our hearts? And because I like visuals, I thought, well, I'll just illustrate this. So I need your help right now. If some of you could take these streamers and give me some help here on figuring out what these issues of the heart are. So it's kind of an interactive lesson. Did they all come out? Oh, there's more. I think there's enough for everyone in the front row. And let's see, maybe you could take 2, Donna, since there's an extra one here. So the heart with streamers represents what flows out of our hearts. What are the issues of life? Now, an issue of life is something very important. We all have to figure out answers to these questions. So let's just start over here with Shani. What is this issue of the heart that you're holding?
Optimism, pessimism. Or optimism, pessimism.
Optimism or pessimism, an issue of the heart. Where do you imagine that issue starts in our lives? Where does it start that we're optimists or pessimists? From our upbringing, and it starts pretty early in life. We adopt what we call a stance in life. If we're optimistic, we get up on a rainy day and say, oh, it's wonderful, the farmers have rain today. If we're pessimistic, we get up in the morning and say, oh, it's going to be a really bad day. Most of us start that stance in life really early. How about this one, Sarah?
Self-image, self-esteem, and self-concept.
Oh, self-image, self-esteem, and self-concept. What do we believe about ourselves? How do we envision ourselves? How do we value ourselves? And what do we believe we're capable of? Very catchy phrases in the 20th and 21st century, but they're issues of the heart. Again, these very important things about our own value, our own worth, our own capacity. How about this one? Oh, success. Success is an issue of the heart. Now, is that relevant for people in ministry or people in humanitarian work? Or is it just something, that belongs to the secular world? Why is it relevant for us? Our churches expect it, people expect it, our culture says success is really a high priority. And because our churches are in our culture, they say big impact on success. Now, how early in life do you think we start to work on this issue of success? So when this little toddler, which we all were at one point, we start creeping along the floor and we learn to stand up, someone claps their hands and says, oh, that's great. Or they say, sit down. Or we start talking with words and they either say, can't you be quiet? Or isn't that wonderful? Say more. So really early on, we start to feel like a success or not a success. And then in steps of development, we keep going. But what happens early leads us on a certain path. What is the one you have, Kathy?
Power and control.
Power and control. Why would that be an issue of the heart?
To protect it.
To protect us, yes. Can you tell us more about that, Donna? In what way does appropriate power and control protect us?
We think we can keep away what would hurt.
Yeah, so we do need an appropriate sense of power and control to protect ourselves when it's important to do that. To exercise initiative, we use power. So it's a very important life issue. If we decide we have no power and no control, we have a very bad outcome with that issue because we become victims. So we want to understand that as an issue of the heart. What is the one that you have there?
Love, love, love.
Oh, love, love, love. We like that issue of the heart. We're most familiar with it as an issue of the heart. And we even have in our culture the image of the heart as the emotional center. And of course, a lot of scripture uses corazon or heart. In courage, you put heart into have courage, have heart. Very important, and it's probably the one that's most obviously an issue of the heart. Glenn.
Health, mental, physical, spiritual.
Mental, physical, spiritual health. Now, they're all bound up together. Wise people have always known that. And as a child, I memorized Proverbs that says, a merry heart does good like medicine. Now, as an adult, I sometimes chuckle when I see somebody just spent $1 million to find out that a merry heart does good like medicine. Did you ever notice that? All the research projects done that actually validate the truth of Scripture. But you see, our mental health, our spiritual health, our physical health, they're so bound together. A baby who's not loved and touched can die, even if they're fed and diapered. What do we call that? Any of you remember? Failure to thrive, marasmus. And in World War II, it was really noted that many babies died for lack of touch, lack of holding. Their physical health was not good if they didn't have emotional and physical touch. So very important, very bound together. Marion?
Concepts of God.
Concepts of God. Now, this one is really a big issue of the heart. When do you believe in life it begins? Probably begins in the first year of life, maybe even in utero, because the baby's very affected by the emotional state of the mother. Now, concepts of God come directly from what we experience with people, primarily mother and father, and how they take care of us. And our concept of God, I should add to this streamer trust. See, concept is a mental thing. Trust is a heart issue. So both our concept of God and our trust go back way early in our life. So if I go to church as a little child and they say, God is your loving father, but I have a human father who beats me or abuses me or who's just a pain in the neck, I'm going to be very confused about God. And when I transfer to God, my experience with my human father, I probably won't like God. It's just going to be very confusing. In my own research, what I discovered is most of the people whose lives I studied, because they were extraordinary, fruitful, wonderful Christians, they actually had to give up the concepts of their human father, which were not very good, and learn the truth about who God is. So who God is, this issue of the heart is just very vital. If we start out with wrong concepts, we have the challenge of learning truth and substituting truth for the lies. Issues of the heart that come from our perceptions, our assumptions, and our mindsets. Most basically, a perception is measurable with our senses. I see the light here. I see the colors of your clothing. Those are perceptions. I hear sound. That's perception. What I begin to do with my perceptions, the way I begin to assume they have meaning, begins to come out of my experience. And then, based on all those assumptions, I may develop a mindset. Now, a mindset is what? Sort of a collection of ideas. So if I say to you, zoo, what is your mindset? What are all the ideas that would come to your head and maybe your emotions when I say the word zoo? If you went to the zoo and were mauled by a lion, you'd have a pretty negative mindset. If that's been a wonderful place of fun, your mindset's going to be good. So the way we perceive things, what we assume about what we perceive, and then the mindset that we develop, those all are stages of our experience and awareness. They also start very early in life. So these are some of the issues of the heart that we're going to talk about in another method now. I'm going to hand this over to Peg. If you want to later help her and Marian just roll those all back up, that would be a great service. So we're going to now illustrate this whole idea of issues of the heart by looking at one of those problematical things that we face. Most of us learn lies about ourselves when we're little. I learned I was ugly. I thought I was ugly. No, I learned later that was a lie. But we learn lies. People say lies to us. When we're children, we believe what people tell us. So if your teacher says, you're stupid and you're never going to learn, we believe that when we're children. We don't have any frame of reference. We tend to always believe adults. Now, I was quite amazed on the news the other day. It talked about the bombing in Nairobi in the mall. And one little 4-year-old said to those men, you are a bad man. Don't shoot us. He had already shot the mother's leg. But this little boy, 4, you think, wow, this kid has been nurtured well. He said, you're a bad man. Don't you shoot us. Let us out of here. And the man let him go. Isn't that amazing? All right, so 4 years old, this little guy already had developed a sense of appropriate power and control. It's really amazing. So what we want to do now is look at the hearts that you have. You have one or more hearts, and inside the heart is written what I call a hidden heart message. You'll notice that most are negative. There are a few positive ones. And along with the heart, you have a mask. Now, why are these hidden heart messages? Because when we're little and we're told lies about ourselves, like you're stupid or you're ugly or you're never going to amount to anything, those are very painful. And so we push them down. And we do our best as children, and then as we keep growing, to suppress those because they're really negative. They're painful. So they get hidden. And yet, because they're still within us, they give rise to a lot of our attitudes and our behaviors and our relationships. So could we start over here with our friend Shani? Now let's see
With the heart or the mask?
Let's start with the heart and tell us what it says.
No one will ever love me.
No one will ever love me. Oh, no. Now, how could anyone get a heart message like that? No one will ever love me. How could anyone get a heart message like that?
Well, you could get a heart message like that in 9th grade when all your friends for the whole school year turn to you and say, you know, we don't want you hanging around with us. We've never wanted you hanging around with us.
Oh, man, that would hurt. You could get that. Yeah, that's probably what kids feel when they get bullied a lot. Okay. Now, it's painful. If somebody says that and you believe it, you push it down. You don't want to have to deal with that. It hurts too much. So what face might we see?
You might see, you don't really love me. What do you want from me?
Okay, so we have a young cynic in the making. A young cynic who says, I know that no one will ever love me, and now you're trying to tell me that you love me. What do you want from me? There's an ambivalence. I can't really trust you because I know in my heart no one will ever love me. Now, this actual statement came from a woman who was a missionary. She came here some years ago, and her mother actually used to tell her that. It's like, you know, don't you want to take mothers sometimes and shake them? Her mother would tell her that when she was a bad girl. You're a bad girl and no one will ever love you. It's frightening what some adults say. What is the one that you have, Sarah?
Never trust anyone. Everyone is manipulating me.
Never trust anyone. Everyone is manipulating me. Oh, how could a child develop that heart message?
If a parent is trying to help them come to the right decision by themselves, which is an admirable thing, but the child then feels tricked into doing good.
Oh, the child feels tricked. All right, so when we get the sense that people have manipulated us for their purpose, it leads to distrust or mistrust. And again, we start trust real early in life. So a child can develop cynicism or this questioning attitude. How could I really trust you? So what face might we see from that person?
Stay away, you might hurt me.
Okay. Oh, this is what we call push me, pull me. An ambivalence. Okay. I want to be loved. That's a normal human desire. But I'm not sure I can trust you. So in our relationship, this is what we feel. Come close. I want to love you. And you come close and you want to be loved. But then you say, stay away. because I can't trust you. So it drives us nuts. This is what I call crazy making. It drives us nuts until we figure out what this dynamic is. This person wants to be loved. We try to love them, but then they push us away. So it's a very dysfunctional way to have a relationship. What's the next one there?
I can only be loved if I am never wrong.
Oh, wow. That's really a good one. I can only be loved if I'm never wrong. Can you imagine how a person might develop that heart message? I have to be right or I won't be loved. How could a person get that message?
Yeah,
Oh, perfectionist. Yeah.
Parents sometimes give them a message that you're not lovable unless you're doing what's right or saying what's right.
Okay, so it's a pretty easy message to get. Somebody's angry at you and say, if you don't get it right, I won't love you. So the student with C grades, maybe the parent comes down hard at them and says, if you get all A's, then I'm really going to love you. Then I'll reward you. So there are lots of ways we could get that message. What face would we see with that?
I have to be right. Don't tell me I'm wrong.
Okay, now what happens in our adult relationships when we're relating to someone and they have to be right? What happens in our relationship? One pulls away to avoid conflict. Okay, you don't want conflict with that, so you may pull away. What else can happen in our relationship with a person who has to be right?
You lose honesty.
Huh?
You lose honesty.
Who does? Which person?
Everybody. Because the person responding is like, okay, if they respond, okay, you're right, even though they're really wrong.
Okay, so it cuts off dialogue. If one person has to be right, well, is there any room for dialogue? No room for discussion? No room for other points of view? And if we're the one who's considered wrong, we often get blamed in some way. But the person who has to be right, when we say to them, you're wrong, what do they actually hear? Not just words, but what do they hear at a heart level? Remember, that's a heart message. If you're wrong, you're not worth loving. So why would I defend being right? Because I want to be worth loving. See, so every one of these has such an impact in our relationship. So if we say to someone with that heart message, oh, I'm sorry, but you're wrong, what the person can actually hear is, therefore, you're not loved. See, that's where the pain comes in. Donna?
If I believe or trust, I will be hurt and disappointed.
Oh, if I believe or trust, I'll be hurt and disappointed. Okay, so where could someone get that heart message?
Because they have trusted someone and they've been hurt by them because they couldn't fulfill the expectations of them.
Yes, and I've seen that one a lot in children whose parents divorce. And maybe the parent says, I'm coming at 10 on Saturday and we're going to the zoo. And the child waits and waits and waits. And the parent never comes. Repeated broken promises. And so the child develops this stance in life. If I believe, I'm just going to be hurt. I'm going to be disappointed. So I'll just stop believing because that doesn't hurt as much. So what face might we see?
Nothing is what it seems.
Nothing is what it seems. The cynic. Now, when you meet a cynic, and I urge you to love every cynic that you meet, but keep this in mind. What you see, that mask, that face, is actually a challenge for you to show that person love and to help them believe again. Because, see, the mask says, stay away. Nothing is what it seems. So our challenge is go around behind that mask or defense and help the person learn we are trustworthy. We are able to love them. Okay, Glenn?
I am ugly. I should be ashamed.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Now, how would anyone ever believe that? Every baby's adorable, right? So how would anyone start to believe they're ugly and they should be ashamed? I see Frank doesn't agree with me. Is it that every baby's not adorable? Most. Okay, so most are. All right. All right. So why would anyone develop the heart message, I'm ugly, I should be ashamed?
Parents tell them that from the very beginning.
Parents may tell them that. A mean little brother may tell them that. A mean big brother. I've discovered, kids are just as traumatized from abusive siblings as parental abuse. It's kind of shocking because some people who've been abused, it's been particularly an older sibling who was never corrected and was allowed to get away with it, to bully that and be abusive. So somebody says, you're ugly, you ought to be ashamed. When I'm 3 years old, am I able to test out, is that person a reliable witness? Of course not. And even at 10, I don't know how to trust, is this a reliable witness who says I'm ugly or stupid? No, I don't have the capacity to test that. So we just take in these things. Now, if that were a heart message, what would be the face we would see that tries to cover up the pain?
I am so desperate for your admiration.
I'm so desperate for your admiration. A few years ago, well, probably 20 years ago now, there was a book written called Women Who Love Too Much. And it was about women who actually believed that they were ugly and worthless, and they were desperate to have some affirmation or love. And so this book actually dealt with that theme. We are desperate for someone to love us. So if we believe we're ugly and not lovable, we may work really hard to try to earn some love or get attention. Thank you. Frank?
Message. I am so small. I have no power. I am helpless. I have no voice.
Okay, I'm so small. I have no power. I have no voice. Can you imagine how a child might get that message? Yes, that was a favorite one in my generation when I was a kid. Children should be seen and not heard. My friend Inga grew up in Prussia. And when she was a child, I still feel astounded by this, but when she was tiny and the parents had company, they put the children in the cupboard and closed the door. It's like, it's like children are definitely not to be seen and not to be heard. So we can get these messages. Now, if you're 3 years old and your father comes home drunk, or your mother's overdosed on drugs and she throws you against the wall, how much power do you have? None. So it's true. I'm so small, I have no power. And if she whacks you for crying and says, I'll give you something to cry about, you really don't have a voice. See, so we can get these messages early in life, long before we can analyze them. Now, if I keep on growing bigger and I still think I have no power, no voice, I become a victim in life, which is very tragic. So what face might we see?
Please don't overpower me.
Please don't overpower me. So we have a delicate person, and we might have the feeling we have to always walk on eggshells with this person. We must treat them with kid gloves because they're so fragile. They have a very fragile inner self. Tragic, but we can love them into life. Theta?
No one loves a weak person. I must be strong.
No one loves a weak person. I must be strong. Wow. How could anyone get that message?
Home life again?
Yeah, home life. Most of these start in the home. Now, sometimes they come from school or the playground or the gas station, but nobody loves a weak person, so kids shape up, be strong. Now, boys are much more likely to get that message than girls are. Yeah, like
Big
boys
boys
don't
don't
cry.
cry.
Big boys don't cry. You are not hurt. Yes, you're bleeding, but you're not hurt. Deny your feelings. Be strong. Okay, so what face would this person develop to cover that pain?
If I act like I am in control, I will be accepted.
Okay, so if I act tough and like I'm in control, people will like me, okay, because they'll see strength. Now, what becomes a problem later in life if that's our heart message?
Isolating.
You get isolated, yeah, because that does not attract affection. It doesn't create any emotional connection. It creates independence. So probably John Wayne in all those movies, he had that kind of heart message as the cowboy, independent guy. Okay, so it's a message like all of these that really limits our relationships. Peggy, do you have one?
Sure. Mine says, I am garbage, trash, disposable junk.
Oh, I'm garbage, I'm trash, I'm disposable junk. That sounds incredibly negative, and you wonder how could anyone believe it, but some people do. This came from a young lady I used to disciple. She said, I was the throwaway baby in my family. She came from a large family, and her father was an alcoholic. He used to call her by 4-letter words just to make the older kids laugh. She always said, I'm the throwaway one in our family. Doesn't matter. I don't matter. When I first knew her, and she told me her story, she said at 14 she was ready to commit suicide. But through a friend at school, she met Jesus, and her life began to change. So Peg's read this message, I'm garbage, I'm trash. And what would we see in this person?
Hit me, hurt me, I'm going to die anyway.
Oh, you know, that brings tears to my eyes just even to hear it, knowing it's written on paper, but some people convey that message to us. Hit me, hurt me, I'm going to die anyway. A tragic victim stance. And the tragedy is particularly doubled because other people with dysfunctional heart messages do come along and fulfill that. Hit me, hurt me, I'm going to die anyway. Marion?
I am God's gift to the world. I'm wonderful.
Oh, wow. We finally got a positive one. I'm God's.
I know.
Oh, you passed them out. Okay, so I'm God's gift to the world. I'm wonderful. That sounds really good. There might be a distortion in it. What's the face we would see?
You owe me love. What's wrong with you?
Uh-oh. Now we have unveiled that there's a bit of a distortion in that God made me. I'm God's gift to the world. I'm wonderful. Now, while that's true, if a person believes it to the exclusion of other truths about themselves, they become what we call a narcissist. Remember Narcissus, who watched his own reflection in the pond and he fell in love with himself. Now, if we meet someone and they think we owe them love, we owe them adoration, what happens in our relationship? It's very lopsided. Now, here's the thing. If you're a narcissist, you can live a very happy life. Actually, you can have a very contented, happy life as long as people surround you and adore you. Now, the people who surround you and adore you don't live a very happy life because as soon as there's any difference of opinion or you don't admire them quite as much, guess whose fault it is? The other person's fault. Out you go. You no longer adore me enough, so you're out. Now, here's the tragedy. In the nonprofit world, especially in the world of missions, churches, we actually have a fair number of narcissists. Now, why do you think a narcissist might go into, let's say, a role as a pastor? I know this.
Being an example, they like being up in front and visible.
Right. So, a narcissist is very self-confident, believes in himself or herself a lot. So they actually are very good on the public stage. I believe a lot of politicians would fall into this class. Everything is about them. Life revolves around the narcissist, and they can have a really happy life. It's other people that get the negative fallout because the other people get blamed for being different, for having disagreements, for having differences of opinion, and especially if they stop admiring that narcissist sufficiently, out they go. And often you don't even hear about the ones who go. They're kind of let go. So we have to be careful that even in Christian circles, we honor people who have the right motives. Because the narcissist is going to look great, and we will love them for a time. But then when things get tough, it's very difficult. You have one back there?
I can only be loved if I'm perfect.
Oh, I can only be loved if I'm perfect. I did hear the word perfectionist earlier. Why would anyone develop a perfectionistic stance in life?
Nothing's ever good enough.
Nothing's ever good enough according to whom?
Somebody you value.
Somebody you value. Mm-hmm. Parents usually. But a child may actually be responsible. I made myself into a perfectionist because as a little child, again, I heard the words in the Bible that said, Jesus said, be perfect as I am perfect. So as a little child, I thought it meant that literally. Now, at age 35, I realized he means be mature as I'm mature. But as a little child, I said, okay, I love God. I love Jesus. I want to be really good. I'll be perfect. The problem with that is we can't pull it off, can we? So then how do you feel? When you want to be perfect and you can't quite make it, what do you feel? Inadequate? Awful. Failure, guilt. And so this is a child, comes home from school crying, oh, what's wrong, sweetheart? Well, I only got 98 on my spelling test. Well, that's fantastic. No, Mom, I could have got 104 if I'd done that extra credit. Well, you see, the perfectionist, never happy with self. It's a very painful way to live. So what is the face we would see?
I do everything 200%. I can never afford a mistake.
I can never afford a mistake. And if you tell me I made a mistake, what do I feel inside? What I'm hearing really down deep is you're not lovable because you weren't perfect. You made a mistake. So we need to remember this in our relationships. When we say something that seems innocent to another person and they get this severe reaction, we need to realize, you know what? We just stepped into delicate territory by saying you made a mistake, because what that person hears is a heart message. If I'm not right, or if I didn't get it right, I'm not loved. And that is frightening because we want to be loved. So in the second part of this lesson, I want to illustrate this in some additional ways that are very powerful. And another way we can illustrate the dysfunction that lies cause us is by looking at our hearts. Because every lie we have is like a wound in our heart. You might be able to see that there are holes in this heart. And so when we believe lies about ourselves, the result is like having holes in our hearts, wounds that are painful. Now, here's what I believe about the lies. You know, the Apostle Paul says that sin is an alien that makes its home within us. I think that's a fascinating description of sin. It's an alien. It's like it's invaded us. So lies that we believe, I think, are the root of that sin that makes its home in us. What was the original sin? It was believing Adam and Eve could do things on their own and disobey God. So when we talk about sin theologically, if we can boil it down to kind of human development, we find out it's this big tangle of lies. And those lies give rise to dysfunction and to pain. So the lies that we still believe are like holes in our hearts. Now, I know you can't imagine this, but I want to illustrate it. So if we pour some water into this heart, whoops, well, let's see. I'll try it without the funnel. What is going to happen? Now imagine that this water is God's love. So God's pouring his love into us, and other people pour their love into us. And what's happening to it? It leaks out. Now, as long as we have a constant flow, we can have some love to function on. But when the flow stops, we go empty. So this is what happens to us in daily life, in our relationships, and in our ministry. If we haven't received healing, we're going to leak. We cannot hold on to love, and that's really painful. So we have to do a little heart surgery. Probably Kathy could do this better than me, but I'm going to try it. Okay, so we're going to have to go to God and get some healing, okay? Got to have him fix up these leaky places in our hearts. Because if we don't get healing, we won't be able to hang on to love. And what that means is we are going to go on empty really fast when we're called to serve the sick and the wounded and the poor and the refugees and all the people that can drain our energy. You see, the love will just leak right out. So we have to get heart healing. So let's see what happens now. Well, there's still a little bit of leaking. My surgery was not quite adequate, but at least it's leaking less. Let's see. So we go to God for healing. Now, ideally, we ought to go through a healing process before we ever go overseas or go into ministry. Because if we've already got holes and then we go over there, we get more holes. But here's the tragedy. Okay. Maybe you really got healing and you're functioning very well and you're really able to give until one of your beloved colleagues says, we don't want you anymore. We don't need you. You're much too crabby these days. Out you go. Or we just can't get along. So we're back to having wounds in our hearts. And here's the truth to keep in mind. If we've been wounded in the past, we're most likely to get wounded in the same places again. Did somebody violate us when we were children? That painful place, that scar, though it was healed, it will be a vulnerability in the future. So now, what are we back to? Leaking again. Okay. So we're still out there working 14 hours a day, trying to save the sick and the poor and the wounded, and lo and behold, we've gone on empty. And when we get empty, what do we have to give? We end up with nothing to give. And how do we feel? Horribly guilty. I know God called me. I know God's Spirit's in me. But how come I've gone on empty? And I have nothing left to give. Now, burnout in its extreme is that we have run out of resources. And it can happen for a lot of reasons. So again, we have to go back to God and say, I need healing again. And we may have to do this many times in life because the reality is we can get wounded over and over. And this heart's a bit battered because it travels the world with me. Let's see if I can fix it. All right. So how many times might we need healing? Any number. But we have to keep going back to God, the source, the healer, the great physician, and ask for healing again. Now, I think I'm going to run out of water with my one little bottle. But when we get healing, you see, then we can hold on to the love. And just imagine now, I've already filled up this heart, and the love is still pouring in. It's still leaking out too. I guess I need to get better surgical skills. But when the love keeps coming in, we get to an overflow, and it's really out of the overflow that's the ideal for us to serve. Okay. Why do we need renewal periodically? Why do we need worship every day? You see, it's to keep the flow of God's love coming in. Because when it leaks out, it's really hard for us to keep going. But I don't know anybody that has the luxury to just come home. It's like we're all committed. Once you're committed, you have to keep going. So most of us will get in a stage of fatigue or exhaustion or burnout. And because we're highly committed, we keep going. So wisdom says we need to withdraw at least for a day, maybe for a week, maybe for a month, maybe for a year. We have to get back to a place of healing. These heart messages have profound impact in our relationships. They govern how we relate. But because they're hidden, it's like we're always, you might say we're in a relationship that's puzzling. It's confusing. It's like, why does that person act the way they do? Why do I act the way I do? Our goal is to ask God to reveal to us whatever our hidden heart messages are. Now, most of us know some lies people have told us, painful messages that are not yet hidden, And I want to encourage you today in your little diaries there to start writing down messages you do remember. Maybe you remember saying, you're stupid. You'll never amount to anything. You're ugly. I don't want you around. Write down the things you do remember. I did this one day when I was in counseling for my terrible depression. And in 5 minutes, I filled up 2 pages in my notebook. Now, I was astounded at how many lies I had been told. Now, another lie that I was told was, don't care so much. That's stupid. That is stupid. Don't care so much. Don't give away your money. That's stupid. I was just, it was amazing. All the messages that were negative I had collected through my childhood and youth. Then we want to ask God to take us another step and say, show me messages that have gotten pushed down that are actually hidden. And I began to discover some of my really hidden messages. One was the one that Theta read. I went to teach in Japan, and while there, I went with my students to traditional Japanese theater. It's called kabuki theater. Some of you might have attended that. And what fascinated me is that the theme of this traditional drama was it's better for the rest of the world if you don't exist. Now, they didn't describe it that way, but what's called harikiri, committing suicide, now that's a ritualistic way of doing it. But you see, if you mess up, it's really better for other people if you don't exist. And Japan will not even publish their suicide figures. But when a person is shamed publicly, it's just better for them to disappear, not be. Now, you might remember a couple of years ago, Toyota had a big scandal. And the Japanese head of Toyota company was on TV apologizing. And I began to pray for that man because I said, he is a great peril. Because he's been publicly shamed, his company has created defective cars. He is really he's in danger. And I prayed for him that he wouldn't commit suicide. Because, you see, when we are shamed, we just want to disappear. So as I was hearing this kabuki theater, I thought, that is one of my heart messages. And it came about in 2 ways. One is that I knew I caused my mother suffering. I mean, she had a hard life. She had to wash diapers by hand with no running water. She had a hard life because of me. Now, it was because of all of us, but as a child, I thought because of me. And then what they said in church really, really disturbed me because the pastor read out of the Bible one day, and he looked right at me, and he said, in sin, you were conceived. In sin, you were born. And I don't know how old I was, 4 or 5, but I remember the sinking feeling that said, oh no, not me. I don't want to be conceived in sin. I know about that sin of how babies get conceived. I don't want to be born in sin. And even as a little child, you see, I took that so literally. I thought, I'm a mistake. First of all, I was born in sin. And secondly, I caused my mother to suffer. And I would just rather somehow unbe. Now, we can't unbe. And I never wanted to take my own life, but I remember as a child just wanting to unbe. See, if I could disappear, I wouldn't be born in sin and my mother wouldn't suffer. Now, the good news is that when I learned to read, unfortunately that was fairly early, I learned to read, and I found in John chapter 1, verse 9, a wonderful truth. And that says, you were not born of the will of a human husband. You were not born by human design. You were born by the will of God. Wow. I like that a whole lot better. I was born of the will of God, not because my father was too forceful with my mother. I really like the idea. Not born of the will of a human husband, but born by the will of God. You see, so I corrected my early misunderstanding with the truth out of the Word of God. So that is what we want to learn to do. When God shows us a lie that we believe, we need to say, Lord, Thank you for showing me the lie. I understand where it came from, and I'm going to reject it. It was a lie. Now, if a 12-year-old said to me, don't be smart because no boy's going to want to marry you. And as an adult, I look at that and I say, poor kid, he had his own problems. Why should I have believed him? He didn't know. He was not a reliable witness. Yeah, that was a lie. I didn't need to believe it. So we start examining the lies and we say, what is the truth? What is the truth? Now, tomorrow, we're going to look at how do we change our mind? How do we get a new mind? But we start today with looking at the lies we already know we believe, that we remember, and then we ask God to reveal the ones that are hidden. And it's amazing what we discover when we listen to the Holy Spirit. And He brings up to our memory, to our conscious mind, things that we were told that we began to believe. Because every lie that we believe is destructive. Now, who in the scriptures is called the father of lies? Satan. Okay, so every lie, I believe, sort of plays into his hand. Would he like to destroy me? Absolutely. So if he makes me believe the lies, and then I kill myself, or I become dysfunctional, or I become addicted, I'm living out of the lie rather than the truth. So this is why it's so important that we ask God to show us truth. What is the truth? He made me. He designed me. Even before the world was made, I was in the mind of God. So were you. Isn't that awesome? Even before the world was made, we were in His mind. When we start learning these truths, we own the truth about who we are. It changes us, and it changes our relationships. So we're going to look at this in a bit different light now in terms of relationships. You all have received, or some of you, a scarf. And we're going to pretend these are veils. Nowadays, it's hard to go find a veil to buy. So we're going to use these scarves. And because we keep each other in confidence here, this is the time to take pictures. If you want someone's photograph, do it with a veil over their head. So if you would indulge me and put that veil over your head, we want to ask each of you how the world looks through your veil. Oh, you all look stunning. Just terrific. I especially love Marion's. Isn't it good? I mean, the latest style, yeah. If we just added a hat, you'd look like a nice movie star of the past. All right, so when we believe a lie and we've covered it up with a mask, it interferes with our vision. We could call it a defense or we could call it a grid, but it's how we see the world. So, let's start over here with Shani. Shani, how does the world look to you?
Purple.
Okay, it's got a purple hue to it.
Purple hue to it, and there are places that I can't see quite as well as other places.
You can't see very clearly. Okay, so assume you didn't know you were wearing that veil because you hadn't identified the lies within yourself. You would think the way you see is normal, right? Okay. Now, how about Sarah? Oh, she's got a fancy one there. Really fancy. How does the world look to you?
Very irregular.
Very irregular. And that would probably mean people are pretty irregular, right?
See inconsistencies.
Inconsistent. And it looks kind of depressed to me, kind of like a blue life. All right. How about for Lavon?
I can hardly see a thing, actually.
You can hardly see a thing.
They're all just like outlines.
Okay.
So very unclear.
Everybody's unclear. Your vision is pretty hazy.
Very hazy.
Okay. Kathy.
It looks blue.
Blue life. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and definitely kind of opaque. Like I can't really see.
Kind of opaque, hard to see. Now remember, we start out wearing veils, but we don't know we're wearing them. So what we see, we think is the way the world is. So the world looks kind of blue personality, melancholy. Lavender, she might be seen through a rosy glow, but it's very unclear. Way in the back, we have another emotional tinge to that person's veil. How do you see the world back there? A red tint. Do we typify red with any emotion? In our Western culture, we say when someone's really seen red, they're angry. How about our golden boy here?
Yeah, everything is bright and cheery.
Everything's bright and cheery. Hazy, but golden, right? So the world can look pretty good through your golden veil. Thank you. Frank.
Well, things are gray and fuzzy.
Gray and fuzzy. Now, there's actually a psychological condition that typifies people who live their life in the gray zone. It's not as bad as depression, but it's like an early phase of depression, and it may be lifelong. Okay? So some people just never see color in their life. Life is gray and drab. It's like a low level of depression that goes through the whole of life. So they don't know it's a veil. They think that is the world, and yet it's really within themselves. I see some. How's the world looking to you?
Wow, I see red as well.
You see red as well.
But to me, red is good.
See, in Chinese culture, when you see... Okay, well, I'm glad you mentioned that. So seeing red when you're Chinese means something different.
Yeah, how come everybody's so happy?
How come everybody's so happy? Oh, good illustration. I did make a mistake in, I was in Taiwan teaching, and I wanted to give a gift to our Taiwanese coordinator, and I chose the wrong color, and I didn't know the color had a meaning. So I learned a lesson, but I've now forgotten which color it is. So I hope you can see the connection between the lies that give rise to our behavior and give rise to how we perceive each other, how we relate to each other. Now, here's one thing I've discovered. When people in ministry sink, these lies are like torpedoes. Now, is anyone old enough to remember what a torpedo is? Okay.
A sandwich.
Oh, a sandwich. And what Subway shop is that? Okay. Well, you know, if you are older, you might remember that a torpedo is a weapon, and it goes under the water and it sinks a ship. And the ship they never know where it came from. Suddenly the ship is just blowing up or sinking. Now, the lies we believe can be like torpedoes in our life. They can totally sink your life. They can totally sink your ministry. And we've seen a lot of examples of that firsthand. So let's suppose a person says, I deserve to be loved in a certain way, and I'm tired of waiting for it. And nobody here is loving me for who I am and the way I want to be loved. I think I'll just solve this problem myself. I'll go find me someone who can love me the way I want to love. And boom, the torpedo hits the marriage and down it goes. And the man in ministry is suddenly sunk. And it's tragic because there's so much fallout. And that person may even say, I don't have a clue how this happened. It's just like out of the blue. But if we can track it, we find out there is a heart message. So people can be totally amazed that their life is suddenly blowing up or sinking. And they often say, I don't know what hit me. I don't know what came over me. But when we start to go deep and we ask the Lord to reveal it, we often find there's a heart message, a lie. The person has kept it really suppressed because it's painful. But at some point it pops up and it gives rise to behavior the person doesn't even believe in. And they would say, it's wrong. I don't know why I did it. So it's very important. If we want to be effective in our relationships and effective in our ministries, we do need to ask God to bring the lies to the surface, and we can look at them for what they are, say, that is a lie. You know, maybe I figure out how I got it, maybe I'm not sure. But when we recognize it's a lie, then we say, okay, God, what is the truth here? Now, I learned the truth is that I was born by God's design, not by human intention. I learned I wasn't a mistake. Even though I thought I just happened, I learned I was not a mistake because God wanted me here. So whatever our message is, I learned actually it's okay to be a smart girl, you know? And I thought, God made me as smart as I need to be to fulfill his purpose in the world. So however smart I am, it must match God's purpose. See, I learned that truth. So instead of having to pretend I wasn't smart to please some people, it's like, okay, I'll just be as smart as I can be because that's somehow connected to God's purpose. And furthermore, a wonderful man like Larry could love me. See, so as we recognize the lie and we start to see what God's truth is, it really begins to transform us. And then our relationships can become healthy. And for all of us, it's a lifelong process, So no matter where we are age-wise or stage-wise, the exciting thing is God can still have us growing into our potential. And we do that by believing truth. You've probably noticed in our morning singing, we focus on characteristics of God. Who is God? And if this is the God who made me, and I'm worshiping him, then I am becoming like him by focusing on him. So we want to focus on the character of God. What is the truth about him? And then what does he offer us? Healing. So whatever heart message I have, whatever holes I have in my heart, and I need his healing over and over again, but it's there for me. So this is really the transforming power of God's healing in our lives.